Hello. So today I'm talking about the next rune in the series on the runes. And this rune is the rune called Ansuz, the answer rune. It's the fourth rune in the alphabet. It completes the first half of the first set of 8 runes, because those sets of 8s are important. And Ansuz is a rune that you might notice in its form. It emerges out of the Well of Weird and has 2 descending lines to one side. And it's very similar in appearance. I've got my own rune here. That's Ansuz, right? Sorry, this is Fehu, and that's Ansuz, right? Fehu is the very first rune, you might recall. And they look very similar, except that in one, the lines are pointing up, and in the other one, they're pointing downward. And this is significant, and I'll explain why in a moment. So Ansuz means answer, or it means the Odin rune. Its literal meaning would be the God rune. The word Ansuz in Old Germanic meant God. It's where later versions of Germanic got the word ace from, which means God. Ansuz became ice, and that's where we get the term Aesir, which is the pantheon, the Norse pantheon of the gods. And this is derived from an earlier, from a word, if you look back at its etymology, it traces back to a Middle Eastern Persian word, Anhus, which meant life, and from there to Sanskrit, to Asu, which means the life force. So gods are the embodiment of a life force, right? And this rune is about that in a way. Now this rune has always been associated with the god Odin, and the god Odin is very important to the runes. He's one of the most important gods of the Norse pantheon. But he's specifically the god that obtained the runes. And the story went that he sacrificed himself, he impaled himself on a spear, was crucified on the tree of Yggdrasil, the tree of life, and hung there for 9 nights, and was a sacrifice of self to myself, and then found at the root of the tree the runes, and the runes gave him the ultimate power. That's why he's the most powerful. He's the All-Father, if you ever read the comics or seen the movies. So Odin is really the discoverer of the rune. You could say the creator of the runes. And you would obviously guess that the Ansuz rune is therefore a very important and very powerful rune. It implies these concepts of all the things that are in the pantheon, or in the collection of correspondences to Odin. So in the shape, if you look at the image here, the shape looks a little bit, I imagine, as the tree of Yggdrasil that emerges from the weird, and there you have those 2 things hanging down from it, the spear and Odin himself hanging from the tree. The answer is to make a sacrifice of self to yourself. The Ansuz rune is also associated with, it is the letter A, the equivalent of the letter A in the runic alphabet. Its sound is A, and this is also very important because this is the root sound. It is the first and most basic of sounds, A. And in Norse magic, vibration and sound, what they called galder, was very important. It was in fact how you infuse something with power. This is something that comes all the way back from India and from the significance of mantra. And it really applies in almost any esoteric school, this idea that by vibrating, intoning sound in the correct way, you can create change, you can make things happen, you can affect reality. So this is also the rune of the primordial sound, the ah, which is the first part of the Aum, A-U-M. So it's a very powerful symbol of creation, of beginning things, of discovery and inspiration. And, excuse me. And because Odin was kind of the archetype of the wizard god, the Ansuz rune is a rune that is powerful for magic. It's a rune of divination itself. And it's a rune that can be used for effect in strengthening any kind of magical operation. And why is that? Well, because it's primordial sound, first of all. But then also, it's the rune of the runes, you could say. It's the god rune, the rune of the patron god of the runes. And so what is this? Well, Odin first was the sky father. He was this kind of air god, the sky god, that is very common in pagan conception. But he was more, in the manifestation of obtaining the runes, this air concept, this concept of the air element of the sky, manifests itself as consciousness, right? As the obtainment of mind, of thought, but of thought in the sense of the all-expansive thought of revelation, right? And so the obtaining of the runes is really not just the obtaining of the runes, not just the obtaining of sound and of alphabet, but of what in occult concepts could be called the word. It is the power of the word. Words allow you to give identity to things or to take that identity away. They allow you to create labels. They allow you to direct forces. They allow you to affect other people by the words that you create. And so if you have the power to form the right words, you can make the right change. It was literally the most significant type of magic. And for a long time, it was only the kind of the priestly or wizardly classes, if you will, that in primitive cultures that had access to the written word. Sanskrit, for example, was only for the Brahmins, right? Only the highest caste, and it was their special language. And this was a language of magic, a language of power. The runes, if you could understand the runes, then you were a wizard in Viking society, right? If you could use them to make things happen, and they all knew that and understood it, that understanding how to write a rune script created something, it created change. And so this idea of the word is very significant and very powerful. Now, how does this differ, the rune Ansuz from the rune Fehu, which is the very first rune? Well, Fehu is also a rune of power, but it's a rune of power that's directed outward, right? Those horns of the Fehu cow go out, not down, right? They go up, not in. And so this is about power manifesting in the exterior world. Fehu is a rune of wealth, of acquisition, of prosperity, of ambitions, right? And Ansuz is a rune of all that power being drawn down back into the weird. And so you're playing with an inner force, a primordial force. I think it's very interesting, those first four runes that we see, Fehu, Uruz, Thursaz, and Ansur, because Fehu is the cow, and it's the rune of kind of the purely external force. Uruz is the auroch, or the bullock, or it's this slower, tougher creature, right? That is was the plowing animal, and so it's about now a power directed to try to obtain something hard, usually. Thurisaz is like power. It dips down and then back, right? And so it's this power that is now being used in a static form it's not quite going within, but it's standing still. And then Ansuz is the power going back down, back within. Or to look at it another way, you could say that Fehu, the cow, is symbolic of the first stage of development, and even literally the first stage of society, when these tribes were hunters. They hunted the wild cow, right? They collected it, they became herders, right? But then Uruz is the wild creature being turned into a force for a productive purpose, right? So it's, you have now the cow being domesticated, right? You're moving from hunting to farming. And then Thurisaz, the thorn, is the wall. It's the wall that surrounds the village. And so suddenly you're talking about becoming sedentary in such a significant way that you're becoming town builders, right? It's the beginning of civilization. And so then what do you need when civilization gets created? What becomes the supreme thing is the word, Ansuz. So Ansuz is about the kind of the point of where all this goes, right? It's not just, because otherwise, if it wasn't for the word, all you'd be doing is creating a situation of diminishing freedom, right? Of entrapping yourself, maybe for increasing material prosperity for some people, but not necessarily for everyone. We know for a fact that hunter-gatherer societies were in some ways much healthier once you got past kind of the basics of infant mortality. They were in some ways much, much healthier than early town-dwelling societies that suffered from any number of ills that the hunter-gatherers didn't have to deal with, right? So why do all that? Well, the first city builders were doing it in order to have static places where you could have sacred places, where you could have temples, where you could cultivate certain crops, in some cases beer like the Egyptians, or other forms of alcohol. Alcohol was one of the great early ones, but also other ethanogenic substances that altered perception. And having a priesthood class that would manage this and use this for the purpose of creating some kind of a school of initiation and of connection to the gods, right? Hence the god rune. So Ansuz is about tapping into that life force of the god's power, of divine power. It's a symbol of invocation. You're drawing the energy in to yourself of this life force, this divine life force. And to do that first, you have to set everything up right. And society had to set it up by becoming sedentary, by building temple structures, cities with walls to manage, to supply it, have a priest class that didn't have to go out and hunt, but could just be, magicians all the time. Priests, they would call it, but really the early priests were the people that were really doing this stuff that later just became religion. And so that on a societal level, you have to do that. On a personal level, you also have to go through this process. You have to first have the lower element has to be stable. The earth element has to be stable. You have to be in a stable position. You have to take care of the basic necessities and do a number of things that are very hard, and basic exercises and all kinds of stuff, so that you can get to the point where you're now able to engage in these higher states of consciousness. Because otherwise, at most what you get is this transitory stuff that comes and goes that you can do, but then things get in the way, or that you get stuck. There's not a system of progress there. But if you build it if you have a spiritual discipline that also involves a worldly discipline in how you manage your life, right? Because otherwise you can't have a spiritual discipline. Then you can get to where you can begin to master the word. And that's what leads to invocation of divine power and revelation of divination, of being able to see things that ordinary people can't see, to see the connections in things, and to see your own self more than anything else, because remember, you're drawing it within yourself, to see that vastness that gets unleashed when you sacrifice self to self. I think that's it for today. Stay tuned for more runic teachings. Thank you.